Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Jerusalem studio. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on the term freedom of religion at a time when we see around the world complexities, persecution, Christian minorities, Jews across Europe, the United States, even Canada, Australia, and elsewhere not feeling very comfortable in their own environments. The situation here in Israel. How is Israel dealing with the various complexities that have to do also with radical Islamism seeking to take over the region? But before all that, I'm very pleased to welcome to our studio Ambassador Designate Mark Walker, the designate ambassador at large for freedom of religion of President Trump himself. It's a pleasure having you, sir.
Jonathan, it's a pleasure to be here. We look forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. And Rabbi Dovid Hofstedter, who is a rabbi from Canada, also a founder of Dirshu.
Dirshu International Learning Organization. It started about 30 years ago with the objective to restore the level of scholarship of Torah learning that existed pre-Holocaust. As a child of Holocaust survivors, and in-laws are Holocaust survivors, that became a mission of mine, and we are an international Torah organization.
Very good. V'agita bo yomam v'leil, as it says in Tehillim 1, and you meditated in the word or the law day and night.
And Jonathan, I got to see a little bit of it yesterday. One of the more impressive things that I have seen. There's no doubt about it. So,
brilliant,
yes.
Brilliant. Well, let's start with this. You're right now visiting Jerusalem, Israel. You have a lot of meetings with a whole list of individuals, from the president to the prime minister to religious leaders. What is your first impression?
My first impression is the excitement and the energy that I'm seeing here. I've obviously been here before as a member of Congress, and I've served as the ranking member on Intelligence and Counterterrorism Subcommittee for Homeland Security. So having been here before, but to see even some of the banners thanking President Trump for his efforts on peace and the work that he and the Secretary Rubio and others have done, it's been a pretty amazing engagement that we have had. My first evening here, I had a chance to sit down with both Keith Siegel, the hostage there for 483 days held by Hamas, and then also the father of Atay Chin, Ruby Chin, just to hear his heart and his passion for the drive that he's going to make sure that he gets the body of his son home from the Hamas terrorists. So from an impression standpoint, I've been here a little over 36 hours. I've been blown away. Just what a beautiful place. The people, it's been incredible, and we look forward to having some additional meetings as well.
Well, October 7th now has, on 2023 has been 2 years ago. We still have hostages who've been murdered by the Islamist Hamas in captivity, not returned to their families. Yes. And we look at a reality in which we, on the one side, we want to be optimistic about the future, but at the same time, we're also realistic in understanding that the root ideology of this Islamist terrorist organization, namely Hamas, is to eradicate the nation state of the Jewish people, that is the state of Israel. How do you reconcile with both?
Well, I have no confidence in Hamas as a terrorist organization that they're going to do the right thing. I do have confidence in President Trump and our administration to do everything possible, whether it's aligning with other countries, whether it's working into groups, or whether it's showing strength. I believe President Trump has made it very clear to Hamas and other terrorist organizations that he's not going to turn a blind eye to some of the atrocities. And I think that's one of the reasons that he has a growing credibility and respect, not only here in Israel, but in other places throughout the world, because he keeps his word. He's going to get out there and do everything that he can. And I do think it's a very tough situation when you're dealing with a group like Hamas that considers Israel the little Satan and America the big Satan. That's how they train their children. So to be able to use your word, eradicate that ideology is a very difficult challenge. And I think the only way that you can meet that sometimes is to make sure that you have a strong leader and a strong personality to say, if you do this, this is going to be the reaction that we take.
Absolutely. Well, Rabbi Hofstedter, as somebody who lives in Canada and sees the Jewish community within a habitat that has existed now for quite some time, feeling uncomfortable in an environment that is becoming more and more toxic for the same ideology at certain aspects of it, of what we're seeing coming out of Gaza itself. How does one living in Canada reconcile with that?
What I've experienced, what I've witnessed in only Canada, Dirshu is an international organization. I travel the world. It's a sea change. Jews do not feel safe anywhere in the world. And that is, for many Jewish people, it's shocking, it's traumatic. They live in countries, many of them, which they assumed that they were in democracies and that they were leading citizens. And suddenly, we're going back in time.
Right.
And many of them feel this is reminiscent of the 1930s in Europe. And many of them are not equipped to deal with that. To deal with that, one needs a lot of faith. One needs an understanding of Jewish history, of Jewish destiny. And I'll give just a short example. Right after the war broke out, October 7th, I was walking down the street outside my office as a woman comes running out of her home, middle-aged woman. She says, "Ani Yehudiya, I'm Jewish. I've never been so afraid in my whole life. Rabbi, what should I do?" I was shortly after I was traveling, I got a call from my office, and in one of our office buildings, I'm a real estate developer. In one of my office buildings, the manager calls me up and says that the protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, are protesting and storming the offices. We have several Jewish tenants in the building, the Wiesenthal Institute, Israel high-tech company, and we've called the police, and the police refuse to intervene. And this is in Canada. And there, as I think to Ambassador Designate Walker's point that he's made so clear, is that the American administration is standing up to it, but many countries are not. Many countries the governments are afraid, the police are afraid, and they don't want to intervene. And there's this enormous sense of fear out there. And therefore, I really congratulate the American administration and Ambassador Designate for the brave moves that they're making, the initiatives that they're making. But I really think that the message has to get out there that this is a threat not only to the Jewish people. This is a threat to civilization at large. If we don't stand up to this, history repeats itself, and it's only been approximately 80 years since the Holocaust.
Well, people tend to forget what happened 2 years ago. 70 years ago is a long time. But Ambassador, hearing this story, and obviously there are countless stories just like it. I can list dozens, if not hundreds, of those type of occurrences that occurred in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, in Sweden, from all places, that is experiencing their no-go zones, even for the police. And dealing with those issues, now being able to take the baton, so to speak, and push freedom of religion and the protection of Christian and Jewish minorities around the world and other religions that are being persecuted. Sure. What needs to be done to bring about that paradigm shift?
Yeah, and I, and getting to your question there, you can't exempt America from some of these things as well, even though we haven't talked about it. We've seen some of this in real time. As for some of our young Jewish students, very concerned about their well-being, very concerned even talking about their history, their heritage. So, and I'm grateful for the rabbi's words there. We are working on that and doing so in a very strong manner to the heart of what you have requested. I look at this and understand that anytime that you're ambiguous about dealing with an issue, you don't really find a solution. So I think part of resolving this is to take a strong position, is to call it out by name, is to call out the names of those who are responsible for it, whether it's the Islamists that we've seen in some of the work that we've seen in Africa, or whether it's others and that are persecuting the situation with Druze in Syria. We have to be able to address this and make sure that we're advocating and telling the story to the rest of the world, where they realize, because sometimes this doesn't, I don't know if it doesn't get enough clicks in our country or what. Some of the rest of the world sometimes doesn't hear the true story of what's happening and the level of persecution, which is amazing to me, that you actually have people that find glee from persecuting other religious minorities. And so our approach to this is two-pronged. And I'll tighten this up. One is where there are countries where there's blasphemy laws or anti-conversion laws, depending. We want to meet with those leaders and see if we can't do everything we can to create a reduction there. And for other places where the government turns a blind eye and you have outside groups, whether they're Boko Haram, whether they're Al-Shabaab or others, we want to encourage those governments to move forward. We do have what we call a CPC of countries of particular concern, that if that country is put on that list, it could create sanctions and other things. So we're going to use every tool that we can as the principal advisor to the Secretary of State and to President Trump to be able to eradicate what we can.
May I challenge you?
Please do so, yes.
When we're talking about Realpolitik, which is a significant part of policymaking globally.
Of course it is, yes.
Where are the limits of Realpolitik, and where does the freedoms that the American Constitution and people stand for since the inception of the United States?
I'm reminded of a sweet lady I met in London a few weeks ago named Emma. She worked for Margaret Thatcher. And in a mixed group of different religious leaders across the world, she pretty much called me out and referenced me as congressman at the time. She said, "Congressman," she said, "America has a huge responsibility because America is the only one that has it written in their law to be a beacon of hope for religious liberty, for religious expression." And it was a stark reminder of the weight of the responsibility that we have. Where those mesh and merge, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all template. I do think you wanted to work everything that you can to build relationships in the various countries, and you want to use whatever measure that you can to make sure that that somebody in a country, just because they shared or talked about their faith, they're not in prison for 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years. That's the kind of work that we want to do, and we're ready to get started with it.
Rabbi Hofstedter, when we're looking at the Jewish communities everywhere, and including also in Australia and New Zealand and Europe and elsewhere, what would you recommend at a time when here in Israel they say, come, you have a safe haven here? Of course, October 7th did happen, and that was a scenario very uncomfortable for the leadership here in Jerusalem. And of course, lessons need to be learned, and to ensure that never again actually means that in practice. But nonetheless, how do you establish those parameters for the Jewish community who says, you know what, we still have our objectives, our goals, and we feel that we need to live in Canada, for instance. Now, how do you reconcile with those two?
I'll give you an example from a few years ago. This was prior to October 7th, when the antisemitism was really rearing its ugly head in France. And there was a lot of fear in France, and people were moving to Israel. And communities were being established and developed here in Israel with a lot of people from France.
But the majority did immigrate to Canada at the time.
Well,
with the Charlie Hebdo and the Super Kasher, and
yeah,
at the time,
right,
it was every 3 immigrating to Canada was 1 immigrating to Israel. That was still quite significant.
They had an affinity with the language
right.
in Quebec. But an interesting point was I had a meeting with the mayor from Sarcey, where we had an event, a Dirshu event there at the time, and he was very supportive of it. And he said it's very important that you show the pride in your Torah study, in your learning, in your Jewish heritage. And he made a following observation. He said, if the Jews in France want to emigrate, if they want to go to Israel, I have no problem with that. That's fine, if that's where they want to live. But if the reason that they're leaving is because they feel unsafe, and they feel that they can't live in France, that is a tragedy for everybody in France. And that's something that we have to devote our lives to fight against. And that's what the message that has to come across. If there are Jews and other communities across the world, they have to be, for whatever reason, they have to bind together with pride in their heritage, pride in their learning, and join together. But they have to communicate that if Jews are not safe, if they don't feel safe in this country, in your community, that's a tragedy for you.
And I do appreciate that, but I'm going to take it one step further, because I do speak to the Jewish communities in the Netherlands and in France and in the UK and elsewhere, and they don't feel safe.
Correct.
It's as simple as that. The Jewish community in Australia, I mean, how many synagogues have been burned? This is a whole new level. And you spoke about the 30s. It's not far from that, statistically speaking. So what needs to be done to wake up the nations at a time when that was an issue back in the 30s as well? They did not wake up before it was too late.
They did not wake up. And I don't know if there were leaders brave enough to pick up that mantle of leadership to fight against it. I think part of the things that we have to do is exactly what we're doing here. The Ambassador Designate Walker has come to Israel and come to show his resolve and the administration's resolve to fight against this. And this is the most powerful nation on earth. And joining together, and actually just last night, you mentioned Australia. We had a meeting with one of our Dirshu members from Australia, our representative. He talked about the burning in the synagogue and burning of my own books in the books that I wrote and were in the synagogue that burned. But we have to show them that we are not going to be running. We're not going to be afraid. We're going to fight. We're going to communicate. And we're going to be proud of our heritage and proud of who we are, and not allow them to demonize us as they had done in the past.
Ambassador, when we look at the complexities at hand, I'd like to hear what you have to say also about where leadership plays a role, because you've also been a pastor.
Sure.
Once a pastor, always a pastor, but nonetheless, you know the word, and we're supposed to pray for our leaders,
Sure.
so we may practice our faith in a safe environment, so to speak. And right now, I'm looking around. The United States is an exception, but it's an exception to not all states.
Yes, very good question, Jonathan. And maybe not everybody's agree with this, but this is my consistent position on this. You can look at this through a political lens, or you can also look at this from a spiritual lens. And I think sometimes we conflict the two to have the best approach on this. I look at when you have such a level of hatred, I think that's as much spiritual as it is political. And you don't resolve spiritual issues sometimes with political solutions. In our country of America, anytime a great movement was ever started and found a solution, it didn't start in Washington, D.C. It didn't start in our state capitals. It started with God's people coming together, drawing a line, and said, no, we're going to stand up, we're going to push back, or we're going to resolve whatever issue it might be. And I think that has to be incorporated. I know people say, well, you can't talk that way as a politician, or you're in this position, so it needs to only be kept in the diplomacy box. No, I think my position's been clear in the decade that I've been in politics, and I'm grateful that even with that, President Trump has, when he called me, says, Mark, I want you to serve in this capacity, and we want to pick up that mantle. We want to run from it. But I think to ignore this spiritual element or to take that out of it when I'm, not there yet, and I can't speak on all the policies there until we get there. We've got a great team of 30 people there in the State Department ready to go. But we will not negate the fact that when we are looking for solutions, that we negate looking at this from a spiritual perspective as well.
One more point that I'd like to ask you, and that is there is policy and politics also in spiritual warfare.
Sure.
And here in this context, in the age of strategic power competition, China has been utilizing the tools at its disposal, obviously capable in doing so under its Second Amendment of its own constitution, to utilize TikTok and other type of outlets and platforms in order to foment anti-Semitism, not because it hates Israel necessarily, but because it causes damage to the image of the United States of America. That's the way it was described to me. Where and how can we put our foot down and say this has been enough? Because this anti-Semitism is turning into a disease that is plaguing not only certain radical elements in society, but also young individuals who are prone to disinformation for lack of knowledge.
Yeah, it well framed. I immediately thought of, we have some strong senators and we have some other strong leaders that are willing to hold China to task. In fact, our own Secretary of State has been a huge vocal leader when it comes, and we know from a history standpoint what China has done with their intellectual property. When I was on Homeland Security, I was amazed to find that China cyber attacks us up to 10,000 times per day. We've been able to block most of that. So we know that their behavior and their goals are very often nefarious. So I think we have to make sure that people understand that, because first of all, I think from a whole parental thing, as far as if you're allowing your kid to be on TikTok or social media, that's another issue altogether that you have to be concerned about. But there is large propaganda streams. But if I may add, when I first started serving in Congress, I had no idea that your large social media platforms were also censoring religious content, conservative ideology. And even if you look at it, as far as some of the anti-Semitic messages that we're able to get through, some that were countering that were somehow blocked. So it's yes, China is a huge issue, but we need to focus on China, but we also need to zoom out a little bit and realize that even in our own safe spaces, so to speak, some of the discrimination and prejudices that exist there as well.
Well, I think the terminology was used during the Obama administration years, power diffusion,
yes,
where they saw the multinational corporations assuming the role of leadership and morality,
correct,
disregarding the rule of law. And that is something that needs to be reasserted upon all organizations. The rule of law needs to be the foundation and the bedrock of Western civilization.
It does. And that rule of law, those rights, is to make sure that we are continuing to remind people where those rights are derivative from, where they, contrary to what when the senator from Virginia said the other day, that our rights don't come from God, they indeed do. And when you have that perspective, it allows you to find the proper solutions.
Anybody who knows anything about the American Constitution knows that it's founded upon biblical truths. But Rabbi, the last time I visited Washington was a couple of weeks ago, and a good friend of mine happened to be there. He just started his fellowship in one of the leading institutions in Washington. And he told me an alarming story where he said, I got a full scholarship for a master's at Harvard University. And in light of anti-Semitism, I decided against it.
Wow.
Now, this is just one out of many. And I'm asking myself, to what degree are we in a lost position when it comes to the elite universities who have been prone to huge investments from totalitarian regimes that do not see eye to eye with Israel or Western civilization at large, and the United States in particular as well? Or are we in a position that we still can fight back and reassert what education is all about? And that is the freedom to express thought and learn from that to evolve into the next levels.
I definitely believe that we still are able to fight back, and all is not lost. And, as a religious person and a Haredi person, I obviously look through and view the world through the lens of the Torah. And the fact that we have, in an unprecedented way, a president of the United States that's willing to take this fight up and doesn't mince any words and doesn't pull any punches, and he surrounds himself with people with the same ideology, I definitely think that a message is being sent to us that you must now take and fight back and take up, be courageous, and join with these leaders who are picking up this mantle of leadership and this courage.
Yeah. That's a great word. He doesn't pull any punches, but he's going to pull your funding. So,
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, there is a saying in the Bible that goes, "Be'en tachbulot tipol am v'tshua berov yoetz," which means without the cunning necessary, a nation may fall, and salvation comes from good advice. It's time for good advice to the right leaders, and we do need to do this cunningly in multiple facets and layers. But nonetheless, you have 1 minute, actually 45 seconds each of you. What would you like to close with, Ambassador?
Well, I would like to close with how encouraged I have been in my time here in both Tel Aviv and specifically Jerusalem as well. I leave for America in a day or two, and I will go back encouraged, knowing that our partnership and our alliance continues to be founded in those Judeo-Christian principles. And we're looking forward to enhancing those relationships and hopefully in the near future can see great progress of peace where this country can go about their everyday life and live life to the fullest. And we're excited about that and building on those relationships moving forward.
Looking forward to that indeed. Rabbi?
The message I think I would like to put out is that it's clear that what the mission is that we have. It's clear the challenge we have. And I think it's time for all those who share this ideology to join together, join forces, communicate, and fight on a concerted effort, including all the members and different factions of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And to realize that we have a common enemy and that we have to join together.
I would add to that, the Judeo-Christian civilization is under threat.
Yes.
And I just came back from Helsinki, where I met with a good friend of mine, Professor Uri Rosenthal, who used to be the foreign minister of the Netherlands, Jewish background, son of Holocaust survivors. And he said, I don't see Christianity fighting back. It's time to fight back.
Yes, it is.
That's the bottom line. Rabbi Hofstedter, Ambassador Designate Walker, thank you so very much for coming to our studio today.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.